Dobro jutro svima. Dobro jutro svima vama koji ste u dvorani i cijenimo vaš trud i napor da uz to što sjednete, znam da ste se svi lijepo izriktali onako kako priliči drugom danu našeg druženja. Mi danas imamo posebnu jednu priliku, taj jedan NIP International Vaccine Meeting je jedan iskorak dalje. Naravno da želim pozdraviti i naše sudionike koji su u virtualu i koji za razliku od nas ne moraju brinuti jesu li im frizure jer je sve to skupa onako kako treba biti. Tako da od srca pozdravljam i naše prijatelje koji nas sada prate iz udobnosti svojih domova, soba, možda čak i soba ovdje u hotelu koji su doista onako vrlo primamljivi. To je poseban, mislim da je poseban izazov stati u sobi i gledati sa pogledom na more i imati priliku čuti eksperte u svojim područjima širom svijeta. Vrlo kratko ja ću vam kazati, dakle ovo su moji prijatelji koji nam dolaze u našu lijepu Hrvatsku. Imamo neonatologa iz Irske, to je profesor Roy Philip, and after that, of course, come in Croatia, come back, profesorica Olivier i profesorica Margita Bruza, koji će svaki sa svog aspekta pričati o filozofiji cjeloživotnog cijepljenja, i to je iskorak 9. NIP-a gdje pokušavamo kao pedijatri potaknuti zajednicu da cijepljenje nije privilegija samo pedijatara, da cijepljenje nije samo izazov za nas pedijatre i da cijepljenje nije rezervirano za djecu, i da pokušamo svojim glasom doprinijeti filozofiji cjeloživotnog cijepljenja, i to je u biti ideja ovog modula. Mi ćemo imati sada uvodna predavanja. Na kraju tih predavanja, moje predavanje će biti, naravno ljubim svoj jezik iznad svega, ali će biti prezentacija na engleskom, tako da nas prijatelji mogu, moji gosti da nas mogu, naši gosti da nas mogu pratiti. Na kraju ovoga sessiona imat ćete mogućnosti da postavljate pitanja, a ako nećete postavljati pitanja ovako javno, onda vam NIP daje mogućnost da postavljate pitanje i online, bit će odgovoreno. Naravno, sa moje desne strane naša predsjednica, profesorica Aida Mujkić, sigurno će imati par riječi za pozdraviti ovako u jutra rana.
Dobro jutro svima, lijepi pozdrav vama. Željela bih ukratko samo poželjeti dobrodošlicu našim gostima. Dear guests, welcome to Croatia, welcome to Vodice. It is our pleasure and honor to have you with us together. I believe that the pediatricians of the whole world are one family, one big family, and that we need to work together to benefit the health of the children all around the world, not just locally. But think globally, act locally.
Thank you, Aida. And at the beginning, it is really my great pleasure to invite Professor Roy Philip to present his lecture. And in the beginning, introduce yourself. Please, Roy, come back. No. No.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you had a nice breakfast. So Moving from there to a topic on immunization is not easy, but I'll try. At the outset, thank you, Dr. Irina, and all the team for inviting me to come over to this beautiful place. And I'll try to explore a bit of nature around here, but before that, we have to do some job. From a background of mine, in a nutshell, I used to live in India and then moved to Ireland and trained in London to some extent. My background is I am a neonatologist, so talk about tiny babies. And I was fortunate to be the president of Irish Pediatric Association for a good number of years, so had an opportunity to move around the world and see pediatrics in different regions. So with that, my original birth country with 25 million babies born every year, to my current place of living in Ireland with about 60,000 babies born every year. I am a neonatologist, but fascinated to see what preventive neonatology can offer. So that's where I bring my talk. Can we do something to the mother to do better for the baby? I have no particular disclosures for this specific meeting, and I'll stick with my role. What we'll try to cover is something about child course to life course. I will explain that. Maternal immunizations, fetal, neonatal, and infant protection from immunization. A few things about specifically for certain vaccines, if it is useful. Healthcare professionals, our role in it, and vaccine to vaccination. How is that journey, and sustainability, and some take to your practice recommendations. This used to be my place of work when I was in London in Great Ormond Street Hospital as an ECMO fellow. This was exactly how it looked like. Somewhere in the middle, you will see a baby. You cannot even see the baby, but there is a baby. And we spent hundreds of thousands of euros or pounds to bring that baby back. And one of our most difficult ECMO runs at that time was actually not meconium aspiration or RDS or sepsis. It was actually pertussis or RSV. Now, if you have something of costing euro or two to prevent it, then why should we spend hundreds of thousands and do all this high tech for this baby? There comes preventive neonatology. Like I said, most of the mothers, interestingly, in this world, as of today, when we talk about maternal immunization, they can only reflect on a TT or a tetanus toxoid dose. That's the reality. In many, many regions of the developed world, or some of the developing parts of the world, others are used, but still that is the conventional. We may not know much about tetanus here, but about 27,000 babies are still dying in the neonatal period today with tetanus. So if there is a way to prevent it, and that is, there comes the whole life course approach to immunization. I know Catherine will be talking about that later. So as a part of that is the maternal immunization. The minute you talk about vaccination, traditionally we only talk about infants and children. And now that is spreading. And one of the best instigators for that, or triggers recently, was actually COVID. So suddenly the discussion on vaccination was brought to the dinner table, where it was never. It was only for some childhood business. So maternal vaccination is one of the most cost-effective ways to protect the baby and the mother from certain ailments. So over 5 million children are affected by vaccine-preventable diseases before their fifth birthday, and deaths in massive numbers. It can all be prevented, not all of them, but to a great extent could be prevented. So infant mortality and maternal mortality, if we can influence through vaccination, that is a very right approach of preventive maternal care and preventive neonatal care. Why are we giving it to the mother? It is the best way of getting a two-in-one business. That is, you do one action and get two benefits. And this is the only time in human life where I can give one to one individual and get a direct benefit from two individuals. That is, you give it to the mother, you may get benefit for the mother and sometimes for the baby and sometimes for both. So two generations, one benefit. And the vaccines, if you give at the right time, the antibodies will travel transplacentally and the baby will be protected at birth and in the first couple of months to some extent. Many of the deaths happen in the neonatal period because the antibodies are not formed sufficiently. So if we can actually give it through the mother as a route, that may be a better way to do it. What about the indirect benefits? This is so important because I don't know what happens here, but for us, every mother admitted nowadays, it's very difficult not to get an antibiotic. Almost every peripartum person is getting an antibiotic for some reason or the other. On one side, we talk about the microbiota and preservation of the microbiome, but on the other side, we give the antibiotics. So if we can give antibiotics, we can avoid antibiotics through an immunization, that will be great. For WHO, one of the biggest and the highest priority is antimicrobial resistance. So one of the benefits of immunization actually is avoidance of antimicrobial resistance. Protection of other vulnerable infants. Think about it. Grandparents are important. So if a grandparent is coming and kissing an RSV baby, that person is also likely to get the infection. So if we can avoid that, another generation could be. And then the other is the herd immunity, or in a better word is community immunity, by preventing those who are vulnerable, who cannot get vaccinated, they may be protected as well. And another important thing about it is avoidance of preterm birth. I'm a neonatologist. Most of my work is dealing with preterm babies, 500 grams, 600 grams, and so on. So if we can avoid that, and they live with us in the neonatal unit for almost 3 months before they get discharged. So if preterm birth can be avoided through maternal vaccination, that will be a very important step. I'll talk about preterm birth in a minute. So pediatricians and those who work with children, we are at a big advantageous position to spread the word for immunization to be brought to other aspects of life. And one of the important area is maternal immunization. So immunization moving from a life course from a child course to a life course, and mother being one of the key players in that. So this is a campaign which was done a couple of years back internationally and in Europe about protecting from whooping cough. As a whooping cough, I don't know how many of you have seen whooping cough in a baby or an infant. It is very distressing to see. You know, the staccato cough which keeps on and go on and go on, and they get so many complications. But maternal pertussis vaccination, or Tdap, the way we give it nowadays, is giving a good amount of protection to the baby during the first couple of months of life. And the Tdap is during every pregnancy. Even if you are receiving it through one pregnancy, you have to take it the second pregnancy as well. Ideal time is between 27 to 36 weeks, and better to be given at the early part rather than the later part, because the transplacental antibody transfer would be much improved. And why it is all important, even though we are not seeing in our day-to-day practice, there is a lot of death from pertussis happening every year in this world for babies. What about flu vaccine? Flu vaccine, we all take as healthcare professionals during every flu season, but that is very important because flu affects, or influenza affect mothers in a very significant manner compared to non-pregnant population. And it can also trigger preterm birth, stillbirth, other neonatal morbidities. So that way, it is one vaccination and two benefits to two generations. What about COVID-19? I mean, this is the most fascinating area. We all obtained a vaccine, or most of us, or multiple doses, which traditionally used to take 10 to 15 to 20 years to develop. And we comfortably had it because there was a felt need. There was a community need, there was a government need, there was a personal need. So we changed our approach. And that actually triggered the acceptance for maternal vaccination. So this is the time actually to work towards optimizing maternal vaccination, because that discussion is already there, and so many of us are well used to it. And another thing is the public health campaigns are there, people are there, personnel, the structure, everything is in place so that we won't lose it. Now I'll talk about a couple of vaccines which are not there now, but it can significantly change issues over the coming couple of decades. One is Group B streptococcus. Anyone who is in the neonatal field, pediatrics, maternity, midwifery, everyone is aware of GBS. Even though colonization is very common for women, the invasion is less common. But once a GBS invades, it is an extremely rapidly progressing infection. I still remember many years back, we had a 26-week twins. And by the time I reached the outpatients, there was a call, one of the twin is crashing. And we couldn't actually bring back. Even in developed countries, sepsis still kills. And GBS is notorious for that. So if there is a vaccine which we can give to mom, and that can prevent the GBS sepsis and meningitis and the morbidity and the cerebral palsy and all these things, then it is absolutely worth it. So look out for a GBS vaccine over the course of the coming few years. Another important vaccine which actually made a headline just a couple of days back is actually RSV. It is a virus, but at the same time, it is a big killer. It may not be a killer in Ireland or Croatia, but it is a big killer when it comes to low and lower middle income countries around the world. So RSV is an issue, and particularly after the COVID during the last season, all over the world, there was a huge surge in RSV, almost like a triple-demic, COVID plus influenza plus RSV. Is there a way to prevent it? And there are two approaches or multiple approaches. One among those is maternal immunization. There is a palivizumab, which is a monoclonal antibody. There is a nirsevimab. Another one is going to come out. And there could be a vaccine. And only last week, I think FDA approved a Pfizer vaccine for older people. So it may be moving in that direction, but it's important. So maternal vaccination could be a prevention for early onset RSV in infants, particularly the RSV peak season being 2 to 3 months of age. By that time, these babies are not protected, and we have no way of protecting them. I'll come to that in a few minutes, but that is an area. Majority may be having just a head cold, but those who are hospital pediatricians, they will know that this group of babies come admitted to the high dependency unit, ICU, get transferred, so many complications. So if we can prevent it through maternal vaccination as one of the roles, that's important. This is the Irish RSV graph over the last nearly 10 years. It's so interesting. For the first time during the COVID, when we were all using the mask and washing the hands, RSV disappeared. But it was probably hiding somewhere and came back with a vengeance last season, not only in Ireland. I am sure that this is the same thing which is replicated all over the world. So is there a way we can prevent it? And one of the vehicles is maternal immunization. We may follow the hand hygiene, but a baby going to a crèche or a play school is not going to follow a hand hygiene. They'll put the nose into the other one's nostril and enjoy the kissing and all that. So the other ways of prevention may not be very effective. We don't have to go through that. You all know about it. Various circumstances like cigarette smoking, overcrowding, they will all increase RSV. And currently, there is no effective vaccine to be given during childhood. It may change in the future. And the only route of prevention for the high-risk baby is through palivizumab at the moment. And another one is coming over the coming months or years. So suppose an RSV vaccine is available today for the mother. Will she take it? So this was a survey we conducted in our own hospital, surveying about 500 pregnant women to see if it is available tomorrow, would you be interested to take it? And we checked for both the Group B strep and RSV. The interesting thing is, even though we talk all about RSV, before the COVID, when we did it, the maternal awareness of RSV was very low, whereas maternal awareness of group B strep was very high. However, for both groups, anyway, Irish women, they were very happy to take it if it is available tomorrow. I'm not going to go to the details of it, but there are so many candidate vaccines during the trials, at various stages of trial for the mother, for the baby, for older age groups, and so on. So particularly with the COVID vaccine rolled out very quickly, we may see change in the vaccine developments over the coming years. So it's not easy as well. It's very easy to say, give the vaccine to the mother. But she has to accept it. She has to have access to it. She has to have trust in it. She has to feel comfortably and confidently that this is not going to affect herself. And moreover, this is not at all going to affect her unborn infant. So it's extremely important that we play the part of communication so well and that trust is developed. One of the important things about the whole vaccine journey is there is a huge anti-vaccine lobby, very live and alive out there. So any mistake, any errors, it will be amplified. So it's so important that there's a concerted effort to avoid that error and keep the trust. This used to be, again, a campaign in Ireland for maternal vaccination for the flu and for healthcare professionals and all that. So effective advertisement campaigns do work. Only thing is, it has to be effective. Like the way I usually talk about maternal vaccination and life course immunization, for any vaccine product to be a successful vaccination program, there has to be access, there has to be awareness, there has to be acceptance, affordability, and activation. And the same applies to maternal vaccination. I was alluding to earlier about RSV and the various prevention. We published in BMJ Global Health just 2 weeks back the first meta-analysis on breast milk as a preventive role for RSV. What we could see that exclusive breastfeeding was significantly bringing down the RSV severity and RSV rate. So both for hospital admissions, ICU admissions, exclusive breastfeeding, and even partial breastfeeding was beneficial. So on one side, we may have to look at immunization, but I often say probably the first vaccine developed by nature was colostrum. There is no other better product than nature developed than colostrum or maternal breast milk, which is fresh milk, which may have many elements, may not be perfect in all prevention, but it plays a role. And the next role is by vaccinators. That is healthcare professionals who are actively interacting in the vaccine arena. If we are not trusting in it ourselves, we are not convinced, we are not conveying the message correctly, the mother or the public is not going to take it. So in order to optimize maternal vaccination, you improve the convenience, you enhance the confidence, you remove the complacency, and you be mindful of the cultural aspects. If all these put together, then we can improve maternal vaccination. This is one of my regular patients. So we spend a lot of time doing things to make it right. So if we can do things to the mom to avoid all these things, avoid the preterm birth, avoid various things, then it may be very highly cost effective. So like I said, the EFCNI was quoting us that one of the best product is fresh maternal breast milk, and use it as the best love biotic. So I mentioned earlier, now is the time to optimize the maternal vaccination, because COVID-19 vaccine has actually set the scene. Infrastructure, personnel, systems, advertisements, all the things are available there. It may disappear unless we use it correctly. So you can all be advocates for maternal vaccination, and you can talk to your obstetricians and midwives and whoever is involved in it to get it perfect. Like I alluded to earlier, trust is so important in vaccine journey. and more important in maternal vaccination journey. All we need is a wrong spark somewhere and the system can actually collapse. So make sure that, as the saying says, it is easy to build and very easy to break the trust. So that gave us an opportunity during early COVID-19 lockdown. So we were one of the first in the world to report a very significant reduction of preterm births during the COVID-19 lockdown from Ireland. And immediately a Denmark paper came with, so two papers got published almost at the same graph, and it triggered a huge interest around the world. And lockdown gave us an opportunity. The women were more at rest in developed countries at home. Their nutrition was optimized, immunization was optimized, their partners were giving support, so many interesting factors. And it gave an opportunity for a natural experiment. And repeated papers came after that confirming the same. So we are part of a consortium called IPOP, around 26 countries, and we analyzed 52 million births, and it got published in the Nature Human Behavior last week. And 2 days back, New York Times wrote an article on it, how the COVID lockdown gave some benefits to the mother-fetal pair, so that better outcome and avoidance of preterm births. So nature may work differently and resources may be different in the different parts of the world, but maternal immunization perhaps is one of the right vehicles to be optimized at a low cost, effective manner to get the target. So usually I say take home message. There's no point in taking all these messages to home. It has to be taken to you where you work. And that is ensure that pregnant women receives all their recommended vaccines. Maternal vaccination benefits 2 generations, may not be all the time, but at times. Part of WHO's life course approach includes maternal vaccination. And in addition to the current Tdap and tetanus and influenza and all that, in the pipeline could be RSV and group B strep. There are other things as well like Zika virus and so on, but from a normal practical day-to-day point of view. And perhaps colostrum is one of the nature's first vaccine. This is where I work in Limerick in Ireland. You're all most welcome for my tourism promotion here. And thank you so much, Arina, and all the team. And thank you for coming early in the morning to listen to this short talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Philip, for your lecture. We will have discussion at the end of the session. And now I would like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Brusa, with very controversially theme about informed consent to adolescent vaccination.
Thank you very much for your invitation. Thank you for the organizer and the dedication. And thank you for coming today. My name is Margherita Brusa. I am originally Italian and Spanish. I've been working in different countries, in Italy, in Spain, in the United States, and nowadays in Israel. But I might have a background that is a little different from yours. I study philosophy and pedagogy, especially children development for the perspective of psychology and morality. And I developed my career as a bioethicist, working side to side with doctors and especially with pediatricians. So my perspective might be a little different from many lectures, but I hope I can provide you from with a perspective that is a little different and hopefully enrich the debate. My lecture is about informed consent to adolescent vaccination. And the question is, do we need it? This boy is Nicolas Montero. He's 16 years old. He lives in the United States. And during the time of the COVID, he wanted very much to receive vaccination. When the vaccination was finally available, he asked the parents to give him permission, and they refused it. They had no intention whatsoever to let him receive the vaccination. They were very convinced anti-vax. Of course, they did not get them themselves, but there was no argument and no possibility of dialogue and of letting their own child to receive it. Nicholas didn't know exactly what to do. He, as I said, 16 years old. He was studying in high school. He was a very good student. He was working on the weekend. And he was quite independent and trying to find out a solution until he discovered that in Philadelphia, children aged 11 and older had the possibility to receive the vaccine without the permission of the parents. So what he did was to go to Philadelphia twice without the parents knowing it and receive the vaccine. Now, these kind of stories were not only in the United States. In Italy, for example, there were several cases of adolescents that wanted to receive the vaccine, and either one or both parents were against it. They went to court, and the cases that reached court and the process always ended with the permission to the adolescent to receive the vaccine. So I wonder why parental consent was needed in the first place. So in order to understand this, we have to take a few steps back and see what are the elements of informed consent that are key to our discussion. We are all familiar with the concept of consent. Consent is a prerequisite for any action in in the medical area. If we want to take care of a patient, the patient needs to consent. We cannot touch a person without his or her consent. And this is not only about politeness, this is about respect of the other person and his right or her right to his own body. It's what it's called bodily integrity. So there is no care without consent. And as we say, consent is key to every personal intervention in healthcare. Now, what does it mean, personal? Personal has at least two meanings. One is individual. It is done to a person. And the other is specific. It is done to this person and not to the other person. I wish we keep this distinction in mind because it's key to our discussion later on. Consent can be explicit or implicit, can be oral or written. In some cases, we have consent that is presumed consent, we said, when, for example, in case of emergency, there is no care without consent. Now, individual informed consent is necessary because every person has to take decisions about the risk involved in care. I decide whether it's worth for me taking certain risks, and I decide whether to go for it and to enter into what is a clinical relationship or not. Now, the risk-benefit balance is always individual. And this valuation cannot be done for another person. Now, evidently, higher are the stakes, higher is the formal structure of the informed consent. When we have significant risk-benefit evaluation, we need a formal informed consent. That's evident to all of us. There are practices like giving antibiotics. The consent to give antibiotics and to take antibiotics is not the same kind of consent that there could be for surgery, for example. So this structure of formally informed consent comes from what is the tradition of business contract. Both business contract and in informed consent, we need a signature. We need to sign. We need to be aware of what is the situation, to be informed, and to decide that it's important enough to sign. And we know that I think I went back. Yes. Minors cannot sign consent. Now, in the legal tradition of the West, we have contracts in which both parties in the contract are related one to another on a specific object. Let's think, for example, about selling and buying an apartment. Both parties know what are the risk and the benefit, know the details about the transaction. The transactions imply transactions of money, certain kind of risk. The one that decides to buy the apartment has to evaluate if it's good for him overall or for her, and therefore signs the contract. In the past, somebody that felt sick would go and search for a doctor, would call a doctor. Doctor would come and visit the patient. He had to pay for the visit and has to decide whether the service that the doctor provide and the treatment that the doctor offer were good for him and therefore sign. Now, in common between business contract and formally informed consent are these three key elements. The person who signs the contract must do it freely, without any coercion, voluntarily. He wants to sign, and these two characteristics must be authentic only after full, significant information has been provided, and the parties, especially the person sign, agrees and understand what it is about. But minors cannot sign contracts. Minor cannot enter into this kind of business. Parents do it for them. How do they do it for them? They do it in their place, and they do it for their own good, for the good of the child. These are the two conditions for which parents or guardian can sign an informed consent for their minor children. How do they do it? In medicine, they do within what is called pediatric triangle. The pediatric relationship is a little more complex than, let's say, normal doctor-patient relationship, because there are at least 3 actors that are involved. We have the child or the patient. We have at least one parent or one guardian, more often two, more often still a whole family behind. And we have a pediatrician and the whole healthcare professionals that work in the care of the patients. Ideally, when there is an healthcare need and there is a treatment to be offered, the ideal situation is that the three parties agree and it's possible to carry on with the care of the patient. Sometimes this doesn't happen. There might be conflicts between the pediatrician and the healthcare professionals and the parents. Some other times there are conflicts among the parents that are difficult to resolve. And sometimes when a child is not a baby and it's not a small child anymore, but start to be an adolescent and having an opinion about its own health, then the conflict becomes even more difficult to resolve. Not only this is the situation, we have to consider that this triangle to agree about something is still not enough, because the pediatric triangle develops within the healthcare system, specific circumstances. And these circumstances are not exactly the same everywhere, about circumstances, about places, and about legislation. Now, when we talk about adolescent, we have to think that the more the child grows, the more the child has the right to participate in the care of his own health. To explain a young child what you are going to do, to explain that you are going to touch him, to explain that you are going to put something on his arm, or that you are going to take blood from him, it's fine. But again, it's not only about politeness, it's not only about to recruit his or her collaboration, which is very important. It's not only about not to frighten the child, but it also is about progressively including an active participation of a child and of adolescents that has the ability, progressive ability to understand what's going on and to have an opinion about his own care and about his own health. This is why in the last 10, even 15 years, there is a progressive understanding that it's impossible to take care of mature adolescents without their not only collaboration, but active agreement and consent to take care of them. Not only this is so clear about consenting to treatment, this is even more evident when an adolescent doesn't want a certain kind of treatment. Of course, it depends on the specific disease we are talking about. But just think about vaccination. Who is going to run after a 16-year-old boy that doesn't want to get vaccinated, even if parents and pediatrician or healthcare professional and the states wish very much so? This is why more and more we talk about adolescent self-consent in healthcare. There is a full recognition that adolescents can self-consent, at least in certain circumstances. And the criteria used about deciding when adolescents can fully self-consent independently from the parents are divided in a few categories. The first one is about their status, and the second one is about their service, the service that they seek, what we offer as a healthcare practitioner. Now, about the status, adolescents are divided in two main groups, what they are called emancipated minors and those that are called mature minors. About emancipated minors, we have a few criteria. Those, for example, that already are living outside the home of the parents, those that are economically independent, those that are already married, or those that are already parents themselves. So we might have the case of an adolescent mother, 15 years old, girl that has a baby. In this case, she can consent not only for herself, but also for her baby. And we have the mature minor. The doctrine of the mature minor says that there are minors that are mature enough to understand their situation of health, to comprehend what the treatment offer is about, and to be able to ponder and to evaluate what are the short and the long-term consequences of their decision. So emancipated minor and mature minor are the status. But about the service, we have what we offer as healthcare. So we, for example, they give adolescents self-consent to sexually transmitted disease or those that have addiction. Now, let's take a look, for example, at this graphic. We see here that about the health services, we have different kind of services that are where is permitted self-consent. We see sexually transmitted diseases, substance abuse, prenatal care, contraceptive, sexual assault evaluation, HIV, mental health care, and then immunization and dental care. What is important here is to understand something. That we might wonder about the maturity of a minor that comes to us with sexually transmitted disease or with substance abuse. But there is a full agreement of the fact that it's better to offer them the service they request without the presence of the parents, because this is good for themselves and for public health. So there is an agreement that is better for everybody to offer this service. But immunization and dental care are something special. And we focus now on immunization. Here, this graphic shows you when adolescents can give their consent to immunization. These are from the United States. And the states that you see here, the different number of states, are those that do have some kind of legislation or policy on immunization. Many do not have. What do we see here? This is very interesting. There is a whole combination of the criteria we just spoke about, quite creatively mixed. So the first, for example, is all immunization except COVID. The second doesn't want to cite COVID. They say only emergency, except emergency use authorization. Others go only for specific immunization. The most creative do combination, for example, of age and certain kind of diseases. And you see here those 12, 14, 15, 16. Some do not use the emancipated clause, but they talk about marriage or parents and add in high school graduate. Other, when the parents cannot be contacted, that's it, we do without them. And others are more strict and decide only if court order. So you see how this is still confusing what is the lack of harmonization about this. So on the one hand, there is recognition of the need of give self-consent to adolescents, and on the other, we still don't know exactly what to do. And why is that? Because vaccination is a very special case, and it's a very hot subject. This, what I show you here, is a picture from the 19th century, at the end of the 19th century, when the debate and the anti-vax were very, very strong. And what do we see here? We see a police, an English policeman that holds the Vaccination Act that was to force everybody to vaccine the children. We see a woman that holds the baby and the man that holds the woman's hand as a way to force her to do the vaccination. And we see death coming to the baby. We should remember that at the time, first of all, we are talking about administering vaccination to baby. Parental involvement was absolutely necessary. There was no vaccination of adolescents at the time. And parents, often the mother, had to bring the baby. And second, they had to accept the risk. And there was risk. All children would get somehow affected by the vaccination and develop mild disease. And 1 to 2% would die from complication of vaccination. But today we are in a considerably different situation. Vaccines are extremely safe. There is no need for parents to bring the adolescents, and there is no need for anybody to consent for risk. And in this context, adolescent self-consent is extremely important for many other factors. First of all, is to respect the integrity of their body, the right to health. Second, to give them a way to exercise the autonomy that they are developed as adolescents and to exercise their own judgment and maturity. So adolescent myself consent to vaccination because there is no need for a clinical contract of informed consent. And here I use specifically the adjective clinical. We spoke about the formal informed consent, the one that you have to sign. But here I wish to take your attention to two main paradigms we have of healthcare. On the one, we have clinical care, and on the other, we have public health. So in a doctor-patient relationship, a person feels sick, go to the doctor, seeks help, and the doctor try to explain the situation, try to find out what the person has through certain tests and exam, and go into a relationship by which the person that comes is my patient, and there is a process of care in which there is consent. There might be even formal informed consent if the things is very important. But when we talk about public health, the paradigm of health is a little different. First of all, is the public health that approaches the population, approaches a group of people, not the individual. And the public health solicit participation. They invite to participate. The benefit and risk is not anymore something that should be evaluated in the very specific situation. It's the same for all. The person has to decide whether he wants to participate or not. But even if he does participate, doesn't become for that reason a patient. There is no need of formal informed consent, but there is need of participation, of what it is called voluntary participation. You want to go and to take vaccine. So we say that vaccination has negligible risk. And here comes back again in the second point, the differentiation we had at the beginning between individual and specific. Of course, vaccination is done on the specific person. For this reason, is individual, but is not different from this and that person that come from the vaccine, is non-specific. All those that are part of the population are welcome to come for the vaccine. Of course, and I wish to take your attention at the end, special cases should be evaluated within the doctor-patient relationship, and there should be counseling. If we have an adolescent that is immunodepressed, is not the same as the rest of the population. Of course, there are specific cases. Those specific cases enter into the clinical relationship. But for the rest, vaccination brings significant benefit to the individual that voluntarily participate, to the population. And the participation is in itself expression of consent. That's why also vaccination cannot be given without consent. But the consent is the voluntary participation of the person, in this case of the adolescent. What is the best form for vaccination? Most probably opting out. Why? Because opting in opting in schemes, you need somebody to come and you need to enter into this doctor-patient relationship, an explanation at the individual level, and you need to do something active and to sign and to explain. For example, elective surgery is the most extreme, but many others. In opting out scheme, there is an action that is given by default. You come here, I give you the vaccine. Because you come, I give you the vaccine. You know that this is the place where we do vaccination. So it's a default action. And of course, there is no coercion, because if you don't want the vaccine, you simply don't come. Opting out is not only simpler, easier, and straightforward, it also increases recruitment, is more efficient. In other situations of healthcare, when there has been comparison between opting in and opting out schemes, we have realized that opting out are much more efficient. So, in brief, it's valid to presume consent. It's more efficient. It also reduces tensions inside the pediatric triangle. Where is the consent? Have you bring the consent? Did your parent? We forgot. The parents is a company, it's not a company. Are the parents divorced? Are not divorced? Did you sign? There is an infinite list of problems that are created when we are within the opting in parent. Higher rate of uptake, adolescents respects the right to health, there is dissent, as we said already, and he's coherent. This is also very important. I don't have the time here to talk about it, but we are talking about adolescents that, as the speaker before said, they have been suffering during the COVID-19, the whole situation. At the psychological level, at the emotional level, they know what it is, a pandemic. They know the value of vaccine, sometimes even more demonstrated, are even more mature than other people. And it's right to give them space to consent on something where they can definitely consent. Now, opting out consent gives a burden to the system, to the public health system and to the clinician. Information is not only a duty, it must be done well. The information is not only targeting the population, it should be targeting society. It's not only about saying what vaccination is about, it's educating on the value of vaccination and to offer vaccination as something that is a social responsibility. Therefore, some take-home message would be that opting out schemes reduce vaccine hesitancy, reduce pressure on healthcare professionals. There is the service and the risk profile. It develops the possibility of independence for adolescents, and they also give the possibility of developing responsible citizenship. This forces us to take responsibility as public health and professional to give proper information, education, and for specific cases, counseling. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Margita, for your excellent lecture. I really enjoy. And now, Professor Olivier, I would like to invite her for her presentation.
Dobre dan, and I'm sorry because it's nearly the only word I know in your country, and I learned it yesterday. I am Catherine Olivier. I am a honorary professor of pediatrics, and the center of my life was pediatrics for 35 years. At the same time, I worked extensively since 30 years in the vaccine and vaccination field. First in the registration of drugs at the national level of my country, but since 1999, it was a European process. And so I have a large view on all the vaccine we share now in the kids. Then I worked in strategies for 5 years in the NETAG of my country. I've been working also at ECDC in different working groups. And now on, as you may see, I'm a member of InfoVac France, responding to very practical questions about vaccines, vaccination, any concern around these fields, and any age as we enlarge our system to GPs. But I am also a member of the Coalition of Life Course Immunization, and I consider that vaccinating young children from birth is really a necessity, but it's not enough. And if you consider the field of vaccine and vaccination, first you have two notions. First, it is global in the world, and I will show you why. And second, it is at any age, and I will focus on that. So this is the agenda I will try to follow quite quickly. And first, how many are we? Since November 2022, we reach 8 billion. And you see that the curve, as you may see, is slowing down. And I will show you why. Why is it so, and where do we live? Only 9% in Europe. So it means, and it emphasizes, that when we speak vaccination, we have to take care of global issues. The second aspect is that in 2022, the mean number of children for women is, I would say, only 2.3. It is twofold less than in 1950. And it is very well known in the demographic curves that on the right for Europe only, there is an increasing population of aging over 65 and a slowing down of the young kids. That doesn't mean we will abandon kids, but we have to take care of our growing aging persons. As life expectancy, if you compare it between the world and Europe, you see that in Europe it's already 80 years, which means that 65 and over is really increasing lifelong, and it's a good point. It's only 73 in the world. And so demography is a key factor because it changed totally and it modifies global economy. And if we compare what was in 2002 to 2043, you see that we are from 233 million up to 1.4 billion. And so it is a phenomenal economic challenge, and we can't escape it. And our most interest is for the families to keep their older people in good health. And the well-being of those people is tremendously important for the life of the family, but also for the life of the society. So I will focus on three diseases you know well in kids, that are pneumococcal disease, influenza, and RSV, but mostly here in adults and what could be prevented. What has been achieved on the population level for 65 and over up to 2015? And I haven't seen in the CDC new curves because there is a plateau. And all the success achieved in 2015 is still going on and slightly decreasing in Europe, I will show you. So you see that we had a large benefit for PCV7, still ongoing. We had a success on PCV13 serotypes, but still you may see at the end that it's slightly increasing. And then we have the non-vaccine 13 serotypes, and these are increasing. Those are data also in 2015, and I have highlighted from 50 years of age. You see the increasing rate decade by decade in both incidence and death, with higher rates in some very vulnerable population as malignancies or HIV. The latest report published, and you will see that all the official data stopped nearly all in 2019 or 2020, just before the pandemic. So we will have to wait a few months to have new data. The major syndromes in the elderly, but also in the whole population, is pneumonia. Nearly 3/4 of pneumococcal disease now on are pneumonia. And I have focused also on the cases and deaths, and they confirm what have been observed previously. So if we have a global view in the US, more than 2 million pneumococcal disease, number of deaths, pneumococcal pneumonia, and the fact is that it nearly or more 30% of the cases, you have a resistant bacteria. It's true here. So it's a bit sophisticated, but the most important is at best, it is flat as a success from 2015. So clearly there is, if we want to improve the control we have on pneumococci, we will have at any age to move on with our vaccines. These are for the adults, I would say active, 1964. The same is for the 65 and over. So we have a good success, but where are the problems? First, the resistance to antimicrobial, you may see on the left that depending on the age, focusing on the 65 and over, we had a nice decrease and then we are increasing again. And the same is true on the right, if you can differentiate the resistant to any antibiotic, or depending on the colors, to penicillin or erythromycin. What is the case? The latest data I found are on the right, and you see that even for cefotaxime, you have already some resistance and some decreased susceptibility. I just put in parallel what is appearing in Europe, and I will detail it a bit further. So if we go back to epidemiology, I will show you two kinds of data. Those of ECDC, the latest published are 2020, but they rely on the data on 2018, which is a long time ago. And there is reporting and surveillance. You see that we estimate that the crude incidence is around 6.2, and the case fatality ratio is especially high in those 65 and over, up to 21% compared to 4% in the young kids. So the ECDC report shows you the incidence, and though the disease is still quite important in the younger, under 5, especially under 1, you see that 65 and over, rather a bit more in male compared to female, shows a higher incidence, and you can compare it to the mean 6.2, it's 3 times higher. The rate is higher in male. If you go back to resistance, you have an antimicrobial resistance 2% for penicillin, 1% for cephalosporin, and those are the most used antibiotics in pneumococcal disease. So in 65 and over, we have to enter more deeper in the serotypes and what occurred. Now on, with the latest data, at least 1 in 3 of all cases are caused still by PCV13 serotypes. There has been a nice decrease, about 9% overall of IPD cases, but there is definitely a serotype replacement as non-PCV serotypes increased by 63%. And so there is also heterogeneity in our recommendation in different countries for persons 65 plus and risk groups. The other study is PIDNET. It's a very good study. So it makes in parallel the number of cases reported in 10 countries, but 13 sites. And the most important is to follow precisely what has happened with the serotypes. You can't decide a strategy without any precise microbiological data. And so you see that the PCV13 non-10 serotypes return to a level close to the PCV7 period, which is a good point. But the non-PCV13 increased gradually and in a large proportion. And so in the 65 and over, black line, you see that we started around 32. We are down to 20.5, which means a 7% reduction in this study. It's good, but it's not enough. And the non-PCV13 incidence is confirmed as increasing by 84% in this group of age. In those kids, in those persons 65 and over, but also in children, the serotypes included in PCV15 represented 1 in 3 of cases, and for PCV20 represented 2 in 3 of cases. And as you know, those vaccines are now registered in Europe. And drop this. We all know about risk factors, and I won't insist too much. And just a word about community-acquired pneumonia, because pneumococcal pneumonia, I told you, is a leading cause of pneumococcal disease in adults, especially bacteremic, and the incidence is estimated to up to 1 in 1,000, which is quite high. So what are the vaccines available? And you have to know, I'm sorry, because it's a bit tough to understand where are the new serotypes in every vaccine. They are in bold here compared to PCV13 that has been utilized largely. We know that PCV13 is efficacious on pneumonia, and there was this CAPITA trial in Netherlands showing that we reach roughly 46% vaccine efficacy against pneumococcal pneumonia vaccine type, 45% against vaccine type non-bacteremic pneumococcal pneumonia, but also 75% against vaccine type IPD. So we have the knowledge that it works, but not enough. And these are the following surveillance between 2012 and 2018. And you see the number of cases due to PCV13 serotypes decreasing in time, PCV15, I told you 1/3, and PCV20 reaching 65%. So the question is why a third generation PCVs are needed in Europe. And because the maximum effect has been reached. And in 2018, as I told you, PCV15 covered at least 1/3 of IPD cases going on, and PCV20 2/3. Among PCV20 non-13 serotypes, there were mainly in adults serotype 8 and 22F. But those are global data, and you have country by country to have a very good surveillance, not only a clinical surveillance, but microbiological surveillance, in order to know precisely what are the most prevalent serotypes. But there are caveats. First, the proportion of non-PCV20 still represented more than 1 in 3 of all cases, and they are increasing. The degree of protection against serotype 3 in both new vaccine has still to be confirmed. The top 5 non-PCV20 are those following, as you may see, and the higher valency PCVs are likely to have a good but temporary benefit because of serotype replacement. Just to remind you that there are nearly 100 serotypes within pneumococci. So just to show where are the recommendations in the States, they are the most advanced. They still stick on PCV13 in children, but they are moving on with PCV15 and 20 in adults with certain medical conditions and 65 and over, that they are very careful of their aging population. In Europe, there is a last report showing a large disparities in pneumococcal recommendation, a large disparity also in coverage rates. As you may see, nearly 18% only from people from clinical risk groups receive, and only 1 in 4 in 65 and over. And many European countries still have to pay for pneumococcal vaccination. Surveillance is a key point for all disease, and notably for invasive pneumococcal disease. And this surveillance has 4 goals: characterization of national trends, detection of changes in the prevalence of antibiotic resistance, monitoring impact on vaccine and disease, and informing future vaccine development. I am sure your country participate to that. The second topic is influenza, and just to show you what occurred in this very strange period of COVID and the interferences, positive or negative, very often between COVID and influenza. This is for the WHO region, and you will see that in America, it was slightly different. So my message is every country has to determine exactly what happened in their own borders. I will focus on this season, and you will see that we have quite good data from different surveillance nets. And you have a large predominance of A this season, and slightly large proportion of A, H1N1. And the B are increasing now on. As you may see, the season in Europe had an early start and was very strong. And these are the different viruses circulating at the end of 2022 and the beginning up to 7 weeks of 2023, with, as it occurs in all ages, initially A and then in green B. You have comparison here between January 22, which was the beginning of last season, and what occurred, and definitely it was a large outbreak we had in our countries. It was a widespread activity, and the particularity is a nearly dispersion of the lineage B Yamagata. Just a comparison of 2 previous seasons, and you see here very nicely what occurred just finishing now. And here the different virus circulating and the geographic spread country by country. And I must say that in the influenza surveillance field, we have quite good data in Europe. If you need more information, you will have them. So my point is that the surveillance, there is a triple surveillance now about influenza viruses with a good net established. We have quite a good surveillance of SARS-CoV-2, and we are adding RSV. And it is definitely for the 3 viruses to a cornerstone country by country. So all countries are recommended to monitor the relative co-circulation of those viruses and to report to official WHO Europe or ECDC platforms. Risk groups, we know about them, and especially in those 65 and over, the risk of a prolonged situation with respiratory disease or cardiovascular events is important, and there are excess of deaths, mostly in 65 and over. Just to show you what were the number of deaths related to hospitalization for 55 and over, here, quite important and impressive. The risk groups, I will not insist because you know all, but my message is that healthcare professionals should be vaccinated against influenza to protect the vulnerable individuals and reduce transmission. What is the cost? It's very impressive, and you have the different million costs paid for symptomatic illness, medical visits, hospitalization, and death. Complication, I have summarized here. They are exactly the same as in kids: pneumonia with or without co-infection, and especially in adults, the risk for the heart, but at any age, myocarditis, encephalitis, myositis, or respiratory and kidney failure. Especially in adults, you have two nice studies demonstrated clearly the risk of heart attack, 6 times higher within a week of confirmed flu, and the other one, a sudden serious heart complication in around 1 in every 8 patients. Person with HIV at higher risk, and in the States where only 8 out of 10 receive the adequate treatment, that leaves 20% of the people with vulnerable to flu complication and also prolonged flu shedding virus. It's a risk for transmission and mutation. Last word about the risk of pneumonia in older adults. You have the different co-pathogens, and Streptococcus pneumoniae is certainly the first on the list. It's still a case fatality rate quite high, 10%, and of course it is a source of antibiotic prescription. So what happened this season with what is called a severe acute respiratory infection? And you see that it occurred clearly, and there was a mix of influenza and COVID, but influenza was definitely the leader this winter. What about hospitalization in WHO Europe? And I focus on 65 and over, and they are the major part of the burden, more than in the young kids. If you go to hospitalization in ICU on the back, you see also that the older people are much more providing hospitalization in ICU. And now, what about the prevention? We have vaccines. They are not very good so far. And it is estimated on this meta-analysis that the vaccine effectiveness, that is the impact on the field, is going on from 25 to 53% to prevent pneumonia. The seasonal vaccines available in Europe are shown here. They have quite good safety profiles, all of them, and clearly there is a move on to have new vaccines more adapted, especially in 65 and over. Definitely in all data, either in the CDC or in Europe, we see that it's quite efficacious in the children, in fact, much more than we considered, but it's less efficacious than expected in the elderly. And so you see that this summarizes very nicely from 2004 to 2022 what was achieved in the vaccination effectiveness, and it's going as low as 10% to up to 56%. But this is overall ages, and if you go to 65 and over, it's even less. High dose are slightly more efficacious, and this is relative from 3.5 to 13.7, depending on the criteria utilized. There is slightly more adverse events. There is another vaccine from 18 age of age, and also here a nice relative vaccine effectiveness. The cost is rather more chilled, and economically those new vaccines are rather more expensive. So here are the effectiveness data of this season in the US. And as I told you previously, the efficacy is overall, any ages fair, around 54%. It's better against the laboratory confirmed infection, symptomatic, 71%. And please note, to prevent hospitalization, it's rather low in senior compared to what has been achieved in children. Flu hospitalization, the smallest benefit was in 50-64, look, imagine for the 65 and over, compared to what occurred in children. And once again, influenza vaccine in children are quite efficacious. Still, the CDC estimates year by year the benefit as the flu vaccination prevented numbers, hospitalization, deaths, etc. The large variation by age, and once again I say that the benefit is the slowest. Just uptake in pregnant women. You see on the right the countries implementing and the rate achieved and the country's recommendation. In healthcare professionals, I will insist also on the fact that we are under clearly the 75% coverage. And the latest coverage in Europe are from the season 2016-17. And you see the median, 47%. Healthcare workers, 30%. Pregnant women, 25%. Chronic medical condition, under 50%. In my country, for example, this season for 65 and over, it's very difficult to reach 50%. Flu vaccine uptake is definitely under what is required for older age groups, and for chronic conditions, it's worse. The last point is RSV infection, and as Professor Roy said, it's clearly one of the most triggering interests in the near future. So the disease is quite heavy for older adults. It exacerbates condition. It leads to severe outcomes, mostly in underlying condition, and they will seek more medical advice. If we have a large perspective, it is estimated in this very recent study that in 2 years from now, in high-income countries, you see the number of cases up to 5.7, the number of hospitalization, the number of deaths. It's extraordinary. And with the focus on Europe on the same paper, you may see that we may reach 3 million cases, nearly 300,000 hospitalization, and nearly 20,000 deaths. So clearly in the context of influenza every year, going back strongly, and COVID we had for 3 years, adding a prevention to RSV disease in adults would be quite important. Same study, SAVIC, saying that the case fatality rate in hospital for adults 60 plus is around 7%, which is quite high. So we have now vaccines, and we have 2 vaccines, and they were presented to FDA on the 28th February this year, and they have been accepted not 60 plus, but 65 plus. So the Pfizer vaccine is a bivalent vaccine. It's a prefusion F, that is the protein or pre-protein we target mostly, with quite interesting data, up to nearly 86% against severe cases of low respiratory tract infection due to RSV, and 66%, which is quite nice, in the symptomatic with only 2 symptoms. It was well tolerated, but it has been noticed 2 cases in their trials of Guillain-Barré syndrome. And so there is a notice about safety, and this point will have to be explored, as this represents a number not low, 1 in 9,000 people vaccinated. The second is the GSK vaccine, slightly different because they utilize an adjuvant. And this is probably why the efficacy seems a bit higher, as you may see, for the different criteria, even in underlying comorbidities. So the 2 vaccines are quite interesting, and there is a rush to have them available for the next season. But here too, you will see that 1 case of Guillain-Barré syndrome was observed. RSV vaccine in pregnant women, we have been speaking of that, so I will not. And my last point and my major conclusion are about promotion of well-being and promotion of vaccination. Both go together. We have to understand that for the benefit of our families, our kids or grandchildren, for the benefit of the society, the more this increasing population will be in well-being, and the lightest the burden on the society will be also. So it's in fact, as said by the previous speaker, a difficult equation. And to achieve a new normal is something we have to think about. Forgetfulness of mind also is clearly a point. We forget about the successes achieved with vaccines. The numbers speak to some few happy few, and but not to the public. And we have to take care also on fears, emotions, the irrationality of human mind. So we have to work ahead, not on prevention, but on promotion. And for me, it's a key word, and it's much more ongoing and proactive. Protection of health, well-being is also to develop, not only for the youngest. Some way to go forward, raising awareness of the disease, formulate evidence-based policy and data, increase health equities. For me, it's something very important in the vaccination domain, prevent transmission when it is feasible, and obviously scale up screening care and treatment service. And there is a new report from OECD about health, and I encourage you to what occurred in the pandemic and what we could do and how we could improve. So clearly develop a culture, be close to the public, alleviate the burden and finance it, increase our services definitely, and establish a better ratio between curative and preventative costs among health disease. And with that, voila. Thank you for your interest.
Naše sljedeće izlaganje je pod naslovom Personalizirano cijepljenje, nova paradigma u svakodnevnoj praksi, a predavač je naša docentica primarius Irena Bralić.
Poštovane kolegice i kolege, moja prezentacija će biti na engleskom s obzirom na naše goste, ali ja ću govoriti na našem dragom hrvatskom jeziku. Kada smo spremali ovaj internacionalni vakcin meeting, onda mi se čini bila je poanta na long life, bila je poanta na cjeloživotnom cijepljenju i na značaju cijepljenja kao preventivne mjere za zdravlje ne samo dječje populacije, nego i za zdravlje, cjeloživotno zdravlje cijele populacije. Pristup je u biti i filozofija cijepljenja je pružiti na pasivni ili na aktivan način zaštitu protiv cijepljenjem preventabilnih bolesti. Tu imamo veliko iskustvo i ono što mogu kazati da je ključna u imunološkom smislu što želimo potaknuti, to je tu memoriju, imunološku jednu memoriju induciranu sa cijepljenjem koja je u biti suština i same prevencije, koja je prevencija od infekcije, koja nam daje mogućnost razvoja specifičnih antitijela na uzročnika protiv kojeg provodimo cijepljenje i koja nam daje, s kojom zapravo želimo postići taj jednu zadovoljavajuću razinu imunološke memorije koja će nam biti protektivna, koja ima protektivnu ulogu kratkotrajno i dugotrajno u smislu prevencije bolesti i poticanja znači i imuniteta na celularnoj razini. Prema tome, specifični imunološki odgovor organizma na cijepljenje je ono što želimo postići. Naravno da sada u tom kontekstu kad idemo razmišljati, onda i razvoj cjepiva je se mijenjao u tom segmentu. S jedne strane u početku je to bilo iskustveno, zatim ali smo sa razvojem znanosti i sa translacijskom medicinom, pogotovo u ovom segmentu, pokušali to involvirati što bliže prema praksi. Prema tome u suvremenom svijetu koristeći razne takozvane omik tehnologije nastojimo se približiti specifičnom imunološkom odgovoru onakvom kakav pojedinac u određenoj populaciji u kontekstu epidemioloških okolnosti u kojim živi može i treba dobiti, a s druge strane iste te omik tehnologije nastojimo koristiti i u smislu predikcije neželjenih reakcija na cjepivo. Mi smo svjesni naših suvremenih izazova u pogledu vakcinologije. S jedne strane, apsolutno živimo globalizaciju i postoji u toj transportnoj povezanosti postoji velika šansa i velika mogućnost reuvoza divljih sojeva u područja, znači iz endemskih područja u širom svijeta, što nam je i COVID pokazao brzinom kojom se proširio globalno. Isto tako imamo nove bolesti, zarazne bolesti koje su nam pred vratima i kojih svaki dan postajemo sve svjesniji. Prema tome jedna i ova filozofija cjeloživotnog, znači cijepljenje za sve dobne skupine, odnosno cijepljenje u odrasloj dobi i ne samo u onoj dobi poviše 65. Međutim, svi ti naši napori trebaju biti usmjereni na evidence-based znanja, znači na i pravilne, odnosno optimalne izvore informacija koje su pogotovo u ovom segmentu preventivnog aspekta izuzetno značajni. Posebnu pozornost zahtijevaju takozvane izolirane populacije koje žive jednu svoju kulturu življenja, ortodoksne religijske zajednice koje imaju poseban odnos općenito prema medicini, a pogotovo prema ovom aspektu, a novi pogledi su fokusirani i pokušavaju se, znači ono što je novo u ovom segmentu, to je imunizacijom ići prema prevenciji malignih bolesti i još nešto što je izuzetno bitno i klinički i javnozdravstveno, to je povezati porast antimikrobne rezistencije u kontekstu cijepljenjem redukcije antimikrobne rezistencije na lokalnoj, nacionalnoj i globalnoj razini, uzimajući u obzir koliko štete direktne i indirektne proizlazi iz porasta antimikrobne rezistencije. Benefiti cijepljenja su vrlo poznati, znači počev od razvoja znači specifične imunosti, smanjenja komplikacija bolesti protiv koje se cijepljenje provodi i ono o čemu se posebno tijekom COVID pandemije govorilo, to je taj znači imunitet krda, znači zaštititi one populacije vulnerabilne koje zbog svoje osnovne bolesti nisu mogle biti direktno involvirane u sam proces cijepljenja. Naravno, kad idete pogledati dalje, ono što je posebno što je nama cilj je zapravo od jučer do danas i cjeloživotni što nam je cilj, to je razviti sigurna cjepiva koja su u početku je to bilo postavljeno od Luisa Pastera, nije se dugo u toj paradigmi ništa promijenilo. Znači imali smo i filozofija, ideja Pastera je bila izolirati, inaktivirati i injektirati potom. Znači, onda se to kasnije, što je to donijelo? To nam je donijelo, to znamo, donijelo nam je eradikaciju. Naravno da smo malo frustrirani, mislili smo da ćemo se riješiti polija prije, razumijete, i opet nam je tu malo ti milenijski ciljevi nismo uspjeli ostvariti onako kako se to globalno postavilo od strane Svjetske zdravstvene zaštite, smanjenja redukcija morbiditeta i znači eliminacija nekih bolesti. Također nismo bili dovoljno uspješni zahvaljujući, odnosno ja ne bih rekla zahvaljujući, nego zbog utjecaja antivaksera koji su tu metodu koja je iako dokazano učinkovita doveli u pitanje na jedan vrlo paradoksalan način, tako da zapravo mi zadnjih godina umjesto da smo eliminirali morbile, da smo eliminirali difteriju, mi sad ponovo pričamo pokušavamo doseći one propisane cijepne obuhvate, ali to je znači taj način i promišljanje načina intervencije na koji način možemo potaknuti dostizanje potrebnih, ono što znanost zna, cijepnih obuhvata za pojedine bolesti. To je ono što nam je realitet danas. Naravno, kad govorimo o paradigmama cijepljenja, imamo tri razine paradigme. Znači, prvo je ono što smo živjeli i to je kraj 20. stoljeća, to je empirijsko cijepljenje koje se provodilo gdje smo imali te javnozdravstvene kampanje koje su bile usmjerene na dostizanje visokih cijepnih obuhvata. I ja moram priznati da kao mladi specijalist kad sam sudjelovala na nekim sličnim ovakvim skupovima, kad su profesori govorili, oni su tako bili, njihovi su slajdovi bili gotovo jednolični. 99% morbila, 90% pertusisa, 98%, znači kad su davali godišnja epidemiološka izvješća. Tako je bilo tad jer je tad bilo, ja mislim da je tada bilo takvo vrijeme i gdje se manje propitivalo, gdje ova digitalizacija u kojoj mi živimo i ta jedan digitalizacija nam je donijela nešto drugo, donijela nam je transparentnost s jedne strane što je jako dobro, ali nam je donijela i izvore informacija i informiranja koje se često interpretiraju kako kome, ne baš na kritičan način, što je rezultiralo tim frustrirajućim smanjenjem cijepnih obuhvata. Zatim je bila ta paradigma, znači izolirati, inaktivirati, injektirati, i ova treće doba koje mi sada pokušavamo živjeti i po koje sada mi pokušavamo uhvatiti, a to je jedan sistematičan pristup u kojem smo usmjereni prema individualnoj prilagodbi cijepljenja sukladno potrebama pojedinca. Znači, prije je bila ideja sva cjepiva u istoj dozi za svu populaciju. Sada pokušavajući i polazeći od personalizirane medicine idemo cijepiti prema onome sa cjepivom koje je potrebno odgovarajućem čovjeku sukladno njegovoj kao pedijatar kažem razvojnoj dobi, odnosno životnoj dobi, epidemiološkim okolnostima u kojim živi i naravno uzimajući širi kontekst u kontekst razmišljanja. Prema tome, primjenom novih tehnologija razvija se, znači s jedne strane idemo na maksimalnu zaštitu pojedinca, a s druge strane idemo pokušati napraviti predikciju neželjenih reakcija na cjepiva kojima moramo biti svjesni. I kao odgovorni ljudi mi ne možemo govoriti da nemamo problem, da nemamo neželjene reakcije. Imamo ih, ali idemo ih pokušati sa tim personaliziranim pristupom koristeći suvremena znanja iz imunologije, pokušajući ih na taj način pravodobno predvidjeti da bismo ih uopće mogli izbjeći. Sigurno da tu ulazi u obzir niz genetskih potencijala s jedne strane, s druge strane imamo te negenetičke regulacije iz okoliša u kojem živimo i sve to trebamo uzeti zajedno u obzir. To je u biti genomika, to je taj suvremeni pristup gdje pokušavamo, to je u biti pojednostavljeno rečeno, gdje pokušavamo tu zajedničko djelovanje nasljeđa i okoline u kojem živimo primijeniti i na ovo područje. Znači, pokušavamo razumjeti što treba od djeteta u dječjoj dobi, što treba trudnica, što trebaju odrasle osobe, što treba treća generacija, na koji način treba zaštititi, na koji način treba zaštititi pretile osobe. To se također iskustvo pokazalo sada tijekom covida da oni imaju povećane rizike i da imaju osobito teške oblike bolesti i to su izazovi personaliziranog pristupa cijepljenju. Naravno, trebamo imati na umu da s jedne strane smo usmjereni i mi, a pogotovo roditelji, odnosno ljudi koji se cijepe, s jedne strane na sadržaj cjepiva, s druge strane na mogućnosti njihovog djelovanja i na načine pojedine aplikacije, pri čemu često imamo različit pristup mi kao profesionalci u odnosu na onoga koga cijepimo i prema kome smo usmjereni. Naravno da želimo boosterirati imunološki odgovor i iskoristiti prirodne potencijale i mogućnosti koje ima. Kažem, suština je u biti dugoročna memorija. Ovo je jedan kratki algoritam pristupa prema prepoznavanju takozvanih neoantigena u području iz pojedinih tumorskih tkiva koje se onda izoliraju i na koje se onda složenim mehanizmom nastoji producirati upravo takvo cjepivo koje bi trebalo utjecati i na preventivni pristup liječenju malignih bolesti, što je apsolutno nešto što se nadam da će naše mlade generacije na nekim idućim skupovima to lijepo moći i prikazati i to je put u kojem se ovaj segment razvija. Naravno, još jednom trebam istaknuti koliko je cijepljenje kompleksna intervencija, koliko svaki put ispočetka moramo uzeti u obzir prenatalne, neonatalne, postnatalne epidemiološke okolnosti, osobitosti rasta i razvoja i mi u biti kao pedijatri imamo ključno pitanje ne da li, nego kad. Kad u kontekstu akutnih stanja, kad u kontekstu kroničnih stanja i kad u kontekstu one osobnosti koju to dijete ima, bilo da se radi o prematuritetu ili nekom specifičnom, znači kroničnoj bolesti koja zahtijeva specifične načine liječenja osnovne bolesti, gdje sa cijepljenjem, znači želimo biti suportivni u tom kontekstu i ono što ja na ovakvim predavanjima želim reći, ne možemo imati transplantiranog bolesnika kojeg znamo znamo da ćemo imati, kojeg predviđamo da ide u transplantaciju ili u nekakvu složenu kardiokiruršku intervenciju i onda da u toj pripremi takvog složenog pacijenta zaboravimo da nismo u onom momentu dok nismo išli prema imunosupresiji, tad treba djelovati. I to je razlog zašto o tome treba razmišljati, zašto o ovome trebaju promišljati, zašto cijepljenje nije problem samo pedijatara primarne zdravstvene zaštite, zašto je cijepljenje doista izazov za sve subspecijalnosti, neovisno onome što im je u fokusu njihovog stručnog i znanstvenog interesa. Prema tome, ono što promičemo, to je individualni pristup da bismo mogli riješiti ovaj moderni paradoks smanjenja cjepnih obuhvata unatoč svim poznatim benefitima. I u zaključku, ono što bi kazala, personalizirano cijepljenje je zapravo se naslanja na koncept personalizirane medicine. Moramo razviti specifične metode odgovora sukladne potrebi pojedinca onako kako treba i pomaknuti paradigmu da ne cijepimo svim, da ne dajemo svima isto cjepivo u istoj dozi na isti način. Obrnuto, pojedincu dajemo onda kad on treba ono što on treba u dozi u kojoj treba, a naravno naši prijatelji epidemiolozi moraju voditi računa da je populacija, znači mi smo kao kliničari usmjereni na na pojedinca, naši kolege epidemiolozi sve to trebaju staviti u jedan epidemiološki kontekst zaštite cjelokupne populacije. Hvala vam lijepa.